Recording.
Recording in progress. Hi, Florence.
Hello.
Nice background.
Thank you. I'm currently at my brother's flat puppy sitting.
Oh.
So yeah, he's got lots of nice plants.
Lovely. Can we see the puppy? Is the puppy
Yes.
visible?
Let me get her.
It looks like a magazine.
It does look like a magazine shoot, doesn't it?
All right, you ready for this?
Oh.
She's very, very nippy.
Oh,
She's absolutely gorgeous.
Is she a retriever?
She is, yeah.
Lovely.
So she's only about 9 weeks.
Oh, little baby.
Quite sleepy and docile right now, but she's been chaos.
Yeah.
Having you.
Yeah,
So,
I've got a new kitten, and that is quite chaotic sometimes
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
They seem to kind of waver between like just completely zooming around and chewing everying and like being asleep. Those are the two options.
Yeah. But she's gorgeous.
should we let them all in?
Yeah, might as
4
well.
o'clock.
Might as well. It'll
Here
take
they
them a
come,
little time
Florence.
to
Here we
join,
go.
but let them in. Ooh.
Hello,
Hi,
everybody.
everyone.
Hi.
Welcome. Lovely to see you all.
Yay. Oh, there's some familiar faces there.
Nice to see you're all excited to kind of chat with Florence today. She's got some lovely designs, so I think it should be a really good session. I think Florence's designs always really speak to me because there's this real like intricacy to them, and you've always got these like amazing details. And I know that you come from like a machine knitting background and more of like a kind of runway fashion background as well, so I'm sure folks will be really interested to hear a bit about that. But I think you can kind of tell that in your designs, like a lot of knitting and crochet designers, it's sort of variations. I mean, that sounds incredibly harsh. I don't mean it to. Variations on a theme. I'm the same myself. Or you can sort of look at something and recognize it. Whereas I think what you do a lot of the time, Florence, is you'll create like a brand new fabric or a brand new stitch pattern. And it's just really unusual. So, yeah, it'll be great to kind of pick your brains a little and
thank you.
kind of see how they appear and how it all works.
I think having a textile design background has kind of helped with that, just because you're kind of sort of, you know, trained into trying to reinterpret things the whole time, and you know, kind of variations on a theme weren't allowed. So I think you're kind of really pushed to try and kind of look at things differently. Obviously with, you know, textiles and knitting, there's kind of only so many techniques and methods and types of things, but I suppose it's kind of trying to reinterpret things and combine them in interesting ways. So I try and consciously do that, but it's definitely, there's a lot of stuff out there, so it's not always easy.
I think that is it, isn't it? There's so many beautiful designs.
There are.
Then, you know, it's like that with, I mean, I guess just our culture has been going for a long time, that it's like that with everything as well, not just hand knitting.
Exactly.
You know, there's so much amazing stuff out in the world already, but how do you try and kind of
things?
100%.
Exactly.
So if you could tell us a little bit about like how you got started with it, what made you decide to kind of go down this design path, and how long you've been doing it for. Yeah, so I've always been really interested in textiles, just from kind of a young age. Been loved, you know, art at school and textiles, and always had lots of fabrics and things like that around the house. So and I've always loved kind of really detailed things, as you mentioned before, was kind of like
the child who would like spend hours making little like beaded things, and just kind of have always been into that, I suppose, like time consuming kind of thing where you can work at something, but you do get a really lovely result from it. So I studied textiles. I did a undergraduate, and then I did a master's, and I specialized in knitted textiles the whole time. And then when I was about to graduate, I had a job offer to move to the States and work at Anthropology. So they're based in Philadelphia. I'd done some freelance work for them while I was on my undergraduate. So then I moved to the States, and I was there for a little bit in Philadelphia, and then about a year and a half later moved to New York. And I'd been based in New York for the past kind of 9 years, and I've just moved back to London earlier this year. So throughout that time, I was kind of doing a mix of things. I was doing a lot of teaching. So I started teaching at Parsons and FIT and Pratt in New York. And through teaching, I was working on the fashion design undergraduate, and I was teaching machine knitting, but also hand knitting. So that kind of pushed me to explore the hand knitting sides of things a bit more. And then I was kind of more involved with yarn stores, so teaching in yarn stores as well. And so, yeah, kind of all of that helped me enter the hand knitting world a bit more, and kind of got me really excited about that aspect. And then I started kind of dipping my toes into the designing of patterns, and then just got really interested by that, especially because you can I think the thing is with what I love, I love the really detailed, intricate things, but it's kind of figuring out where you can place that, especially in like an industry side of things. But I think what's great about the hand knitting patterns is that they can be so intricate because you're not selling the piece. So that for me has really kind of made it exciting, because you can come out with quite sort of detailed, time consuming things, and it sort of slots in quite well.
Yeah, and I guess lots of people are quite happy to learn a new technique and to, like if something's more intricate, you just get more value for money in many ways.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no rush for things. We all know how long something can take. So I think you can almost embrace that like slower aspect of it, and kind of just sort of go with it and enjoy the process a bit more, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
How would you say that New York and London compare to each other? What is the kind of...
Sounds very glamorous.
It does.
In New York.
I know. For us down in Devon,
I think they have a lot of similarities. I loved my time there. It was great. But yeah, it's nice to be home. I think London feels calmer in a way, which is funny because it's still quite hectic. But yeah, I think London feels a bit more sort of like spread out and a little bit less frenetic. But then I think that's kind of what makes New York as well, because it has that kind of energy. So I'll be back in February for Vogue Knitting, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah, it's kind of it's nice to be home, but yeah, I had a really great time there, and I think the hand knitting scene, is great there, just in terms of the number of shops and everything like that. So but I think in recent years, kind of all of those things have kind of exploded everywhere. Even just when I was living in London before compared to now, there's, so many more shops and things like that. So I think you can kind of be anywhere and still have great exposure to things.
Definitely. And especially with like YouTube and, Ravelry, and there's so many amazing online resources these days, aren't there?
Definitely.
You can just, regardless of where you are, and even if you're down in Devon, you can still, like, there aren't many, because we've got such a low population density, there aren't many like yarn shops that sell something other than just acrylic really round here. Like there's some acrylic yarn shops, but there aren't many that stock like kind of proper wool. But you can still join in, you can buy it on the internet, look at it all,
of course. And it's always
100%.
It's always nice to when you travel somewhere as well to go to a yarn store and have a little extra space in your suitcase.
100%. So have you always done like a bit of hand knitting on the side then, even when you were working more in like runway and kind of the fashion industry, or was it more kind of machine knitting and then you discovered the hand knitting later on? Or
I think I've always loved the kind of the hand element of things. So at university it was definitely more kind of machine knit focused, but what I loved to do a lot of the time was kind of combine the two. So often I'd knit something on the machine but then maybe like embroider into it by hand. So I've always loved to combine those things, but I would say I dabbled in it when I was younger. My mum's a great knitter, but would always get a little frustrated by it and not quite be able to crack it. But I think when I started sort of teaching, I was like, I've got to get good at this quickly. So that was a good push. And then I think from there, kind of just step by step started to like really get into that side of things. And I love machine and hand knitting. They're kind of, I think the machine knitting is quicker, but it can be just as kind of intricate and time consuming. So there's kind of, I think you can get whatever you want out of it. But I do love the kind of more relaxing side of hand knitting too. Now that I'm sort of fully immersed into it, it's like I can't imagine not doing it.
Definitely. I always think it's actually crafters are some of my favorite things about the hand knitting and crochet. It's just like the people are just great.
Exactly.
Everyone's like a little bit weird in a way that's quite wonderful.
Because there's a kind of, I think, especially with knitting, it's like an element of control, I think, because it's like you really are controlling every sort of aspect of the fabric and the garment. But and that's the great thing about the internet and working with people all over and connecting with test knitters all over the world, and you become sort of like great friends with some people you've never even met. So I think that community side of it is really lovely, and there's not that many other things where I think that sort of is done as much in that same way. So it's nice.
Definitely. And do you have some designs that, because I'm just conscious that there might be some people here who aren't familiar with your patterns, so do you have anything you could show us?
I do, yes. So I'll start with this one. So this was actually the first time I've used your yarn. This was a collaboration last year that I did with Loop London.
Oh, cool.
I'll hold this up so you can see. So Susan from Loop named this one the Florence Shawl. And so this is using the sport weight Yarnadelic, and it's a long crescent shaped shawl. The main detail is this flower trim. So each flower is made as its own little unit. They're all made first, and then the stitches get picked up, and then the body of it is knitted just with garter stitch and some short rows. So a lot of I do have a fair few garments I've designed, but I really love kind of the shawl and the scarves, just because, you know, of my textile design background. So I think the fact that you have kind of like the freedom of just creating a big piece of fabric is always something that really excites me. So yeah, this piece was a lot of fun to make. I've got a couple of little
so sweet, aren't they?
Swatches that I've done.
They're knitted flowers. Oh yeah, I can see now.
They are, yeah. So they are just garter stitch. They've got little
They've got bobbles.
bubble. Sorry, puppy on the loose. Little bubbles. So you make the petals first. Then they all get joined together. Then you've got some bobble stitches, some slip stitches, and then you do some decreasing, and then they all just get picked up and joined. So it's good for using little scraps of yarn.
So sweet.
Yeah, so that was...
Oh yeah. Yeah, you feel like you could use them to edge anything you like.
Yeah, I know. I think it would make a nice blanket edging.
Definitely.
And then I've got this one here, which is called the Scout Shawl.
Wow.
So this one uses a mix of Fair Isle and Intarsia. And it's kind of gives like a patchwork quilt effect.
Yeah.
So you've got these different blocks of Fair Isle that are just look like they're pieced together, but it's just through using the Intarsia technique. And it's knitted tip to tip, so it kind of makes a nice smallish accessory. That's kind of it. And this is done in fingering weight. So that this is a popular one. And then I've also got, this is another Intarsia design. This is called the Elvan shawl.
And there's lovely bubbles on there as well again.
Yeah, so this is using cacon yarn in their fingering base, and it's got these different motifs kind of running at the side. So this is a really good one for anyone who wants to try Intarsia, because they're quite simple geometric motifs, and the same thing, the purl side mirrors the knit side, so it's quite sort of intuitive with the motifs, and they're quite simple to knit. You're not working with too many colors.
And what tips and tricks would you say for anyone that hasn't ever done Intarsia, or maybe hasn't whipped out the Intarsia since the 80s? Because I know it's just having a bit of a revival again now.
Yeah, I love it because I think with knitting, there's so, you know, because the fabric builds horizontally and there's so many, you know, stripes or whatever, you're kind of building things in those like horizontal blocks. With Intarsia, you can kind of break away from that, which I find really interesting. And it's just gives you the ability to create, I think, really unique kind of compositions. I think that the technique itself is super simple. All you're doing is using one yarn at a time and just picking the new one up in a certain way. The only thing that makes it more challenging, it's not even challenging, but you just kind of, it takes more time, I think, is the more yarns that you're working with, you're having to kind of rearrange the yarns a bit more. So it's something that The more yarns that you're working with, you probably want to work at a table. It's not necessarily like a sofa project. Having said that, if you're just, working with like a few, it's fine. But it's really simple. And yeah, I love the effect with it. So I think it's kind of endless, the things you can do.
And do you wind stuff onto bobbins then to kind of make it a more manageable, or do you tend to just knit from the balls?
It depends. Often I'll just knit from the ball, and then I'm kind of not like, winding lots off and not using the whole bobbin. So I find you're kind of like wasting less. But if that annoys you and you want to work with smaller bits, then you definitely can. So like with something like this, you could definitely create your little bobbins and work from that. But yeah, it really depends. With the Scout Shawl, there's one color where you're using slightly smaller balls, and for the edging, then you could use a bobbin. But for the rest of it, then just using kind of the big one is fine. But you get into like a rhythm with it, so it's not too challenging. But it's kind of, I think you have to kind of just embrace it.
Well, it's nice to try a new technique, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you ever done Intarsia?
Yeah, I like Fair Isle and Intarsia.
Yeah.
And have sometimes mix them up in the same project.
Yeah.
With Intarsia, you just have to sort of plan a bit when you see the Intarsia coming to know like, oh right, because I do often wind up a little bit of itself. Go, oh, okay, so I'm going to get to the motif and then need a new bit and then need another bit, and then planning where the wool is going to be.
Exactly.
That's quite nice, isn't it? Keeping you on your toes. How about folks in the Zoom? Do let us know in the chat if you've kind of had a go either with Intarsia or Fair Isle, how you feel about it.
I think it's once you're used to how you connect the yarns at the change point as well, I think you could easily slip up on that as a beginner and be like, oh god, it's not working. But once you've got that, like you say, the rhythm of like crossing them.
Exactly.
Well, Shana's asked,
got a question.
What is the difference between Intarsia and Fair Isle? So shall I answer? I should probably let Florence answer.
No, you can answer. Go for it.
You can correct me when I say something wrong. So in Fair Isle, you're generally just using 2 colours at a time on a row, and you allow the colour you're not working with to float behind the stitches as you go across. It's a common in knitting from the Highlands and Shetlands and Fair Isle, actual island. You'll often see it in beautiful yokes and sometimes like whole jumpers. It's amazing. And then Intarsia allows you to do small blocks of colour like those motifs that Florence was just showing you. So instead of floating a colour across the back, you can do wider areas and more interesting bigger blocks of colour, and so you have separate balls and you intertwine them at the edges of the colour changes. I hope that made sense, Sian.
Definitely. I reckon that's a good answer. That's a very good answer. So you'll end up with like a stretchier fabric because you've only got one, you don't have any floats. So when you're doing like Fair Isle, you'll have quite a dense fabric that's like double thickness. And with Intarsia, it's sort of like stocking stitch or garter stitch, but you've just got that like colour join, don't you?
Yeah, and you can combine it with any stitch as well. So it's kind of like you could have it with cables or just bobbles or kind of whatever you wanted as well.
Whatever floats your boat. Sean's happy with your explanation. So you did well. We've also got Gillian saying that she loves Intarsia and always uses the bobbins. So no, it is a good technique. I think it's becoming it's sort of having a bit of a renaissance at the moment.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think it's especially I think once you start interjecting like interesting yarns as well, because a couple of designs I've used different thicknesses of yarns with it, and then you kind of can get almost like a floating effect. So I think there's a lot you can sort of play around with. Yeah.
Definitely. And would you like to show folks the new thing that you've been working on in Yarnadelic Worsted?
Yes.
That's got lots of intarsia as well.
Yes, definitely. So I had, so I did a swatch a long time ago, actually, where it was inspired by woven fabric. So it kind of has like this checked effect. And the background yarn is something different, but I used the sport weight Yarnadelic for these kind of fringy parts, and I really loved the way that it kind of works with that, how you've sort of got like the lovely texture of the yarn. So it's mixing intarsia to create these different blocks of color, and it's actually showing the wrong side of the intarsia, which I really like, because it almost gives kind of like
always crossed the same way. Very nice.
So it almost gives kind of like a top stitch sort of look.
Yes, it's almost like you've embroidered it on. It's very pretty.
So that was kind of the inspiration. And then with the new Yarnadelic, so I reworked that in just 2 colors to kind of give, more of that kind of classic look. And then for the final design, it's a generous sized scarf. So it's got some slight shaping at the bottom there. And then it's just a nice, big, generous kind of wrap. So I've only just started adding the woven elements to it. You've got, so in the squares, it's moss stitch, and then that kind of gives you a grid to work with. And then you've got multiple ends of one of the yarns that you're just weaving through, and then I'll just finish it with just a kind of a stitch in each corner to keep them in place. But it's this sort of, kind of a woven checked effect.
It's absolutely beautiful, and it's so different from so many hand knits. You see that like final kind of embellishing. It just really is icing on the cake.
Those little tufts, just like you want to touch it and go, oh, look at this.
So, and I think I'll definitely play around with some other colors as well in the pattern releases, because I think I loved in the swatch where you're mixing the different colors for the woven aspect too. So I think that could look really cool as well if you've got kind of multiple like colors coming through. But
you could mix it up, couldn't you? You could have a monochrome version and a version.
Yes.
I love how it just looks so cozy as well. To really
nice and
wrap yourself up in. It's like
nice
a giant scarf, isn't it? Nice
and generous sized, and it'll be a good cold weather.
Or just in the house to save electricity. It's gorgeous. Really nice.
So this will be released probably mid-November.
Does it have a name yet?
Savile Scarf.
Ooh, very nice.
Yes.
And what's the name inspired by? Do you always how do you end up picking like names?
Usually just kind of the feel of it, but because it was kind of like a woven sort of like suiting inspiration, and just with Savile Row and that kind of notion. But usually I have a rough idea, and then I feel like they look like something. That's how I choose.
Got to come from somewhere.
They have like a personality.
Grand. Oh, Andrea is saying that it's absolutely beautiful. I would.
Oh, thank you.
agree.
Thank you. No, but the yarn is great to work with. It's kind of perfect for the stitch definition and to get that lovely sort of fringe effect. So
yeah.
Happy to hear it. It does really pop nicely. I was designing, I was doing some cable swatches in the Yarnadelic Worsted last night, actually, for the design, and it does just everything really sits forward happily, for sure.
It does. And the I forget the name of this.
Black Gold of the Sun.
Black Gold of the Sun. It's such a interesting color too, because there's so many flecks within it. It's very kind of complex. So in the different lights, and especially when doing the fringing as well, you can see all these little sort of flashes. So that's really,
colors will come out when it's a bit.
That's really beautiful.
100%. Oh, grand. So how would you say then, we were talking a little bit about it before everyone jumped on the Zoom, but what would you say the difference is between more like the fashion world and the kind of more knitting world? What's kind of drawn you more into the kind of, because I think I hadn't come across your hand knitting pattern design until fairly recently. So.
I think so the kind of, I suppose the more industry focused projects I was doing before, I think there's a lot more parameters on everything. So I think with the hand knitting side, it can be quite indulgent, I suppose, because it's the yarns and the materials are so beautiful and everything's, you can get such lovely quality things. So I think you don't really have to kind of compromise on any of that. I think with more industry things, then there's, I suppose, more parameters in terms of time, and everything has to be done to such tight timelines. And then just really being so conscious of the materials and how much everything's costing, and whether something's going to be feasible for a factory to create, and so on. So I think with the hand knitting aspect, it's you really, the whole point is that people are taking time to create these things, and it is all about kind of embracing the slowness and the process, and whether it's you're making something just more for the process or for the actual product, or kind of a combination of those aspects. So I think I like to keep those in mind when I'm designing something, but I think kind of all those things which I suppose are harder and maybe negatives with more of an industry type project become positives with more of a craft based thing. And I think it's just, anything that you're making, you are really kind of caring for it, and it is a good reaction to, I just think, the fashion industry right now, where it just seems like there's just so much stuff that we just don't need. So I think it is, you really put a lot of thought into what you're making, because you're spending money on the materials, you're investing a lot of time. So I think you do really think, am I going to wear this, am I going to use this? Or if you're giving it to someone, then kind of all of those things you're really thinking about a lot more. So I think it's been a great fit for my work, because I get to kind of, there's not a limit on the creativity side of things, which is really exciting, because I think you can really push yourself. I think the only limit is just how long things take. So
writing the pattern up can be quite a complicated thing sometimes. You have to be able to express it, don't you?
So I wish I had 2 extra hands and could fast forward my speed, but I think that's kind of like the only hindrance. But
I was wondering, if you're designing like your own patterns for hand knitters, you're free to get your inspiration from anywhere. In the fashion industry, is it more that you're given a brief of, we want a jumper that looks like X, and is that difficult for a creative mind to be limited?
I think so, yeah. I think a lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of it was kind of, there was a lot of copying and not so much free thinking that was kind of embraced. That was at least one side of things I experienced. And then another side of things would be more kind of like, this is something we like, deconstruct it and create it. So in terms of like, here's a picture, if it was more kind of swatch development for fashion brands and things like that, it would be a picture of something that they had found, and then you had to sort of almost create the stitch yourself or figure out what it was, and then recreate it kind of according to their specs. So a lot of like, a deep understanding of like the stitches and all of that, but then a lot of trial and error of like getting things to measure exactly and so on. So, but it's a kind of a good challenge, but not as much creativity, sort of. I suppose more something like that has a bit more kind of technical ability within it. But I think with, because as well you are self-directed, or if you're collaborating, and it is just a much more creative process. And I love, collaborating with other companies and brands and kind of, throwing ideas around in that way as well. And, you can still be working to briefs if you're doing submissions and things like that. But I think everything's a lot more in line with, I suppose, your kind of ethos. So it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Do you get your inspiration from anywhere in particular, or does it just come from anything?
I think I'm super inspired just by all different types of textiles. So that's like an ongoing kind of thing. So whether it's like patchwork quilts or embroidery or kind of examples of things from all over the world, like I love those types of historical textiles. They really inspire kind of like my motifs and shapes and things like that. I love quite organic and floral inspired things, but then I also really love sort of geometric, quite bold patterns. So I think I kind of, the one I have lots and lots of ideas. I think the hardest thing is like translating the idea into what you want it to be. I think it's like the translation that is the trickiest thing. So
I was just going to ask, how many of your swatches or your ideas then do become like garments eventually then? Because that is always, like,
I think, it's difficult. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is just kind of to persevere with something, because often something really tiny never looks good. And I can be quick to kind of think like, oh, this isn't looking great. And then I'll say to myself, just keep going with it. If you don't like it when it's twice the size, then okay, scrap it. But I think it is, and sometimes I'll do something and I'll think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to go through with this. And then I just, so it's a lot of trial and error. But I think the kind of, I mean, sometimes I'll do a swatch and I just will think this isn't really exciting enough, and I'll kind of put it to one side. But I think if I think that there's something intriguing enough in it, then I'll go through with it. Another piece that a design that's coming out next week. Ooh. This is a good example of exactly what we're talking about. So when I made, so this starts off with the border, and because of the shape of the border, it has to be blocked kind of pretty, aggressively in order for the shapes to kind of look how they want.
Those little tassels are so cute.
Yeah, I do love a tassel. So when I was making this, I was kind of so on the fence whether to continue, and I nearly scrapped it. And then I just thought, okay, just keep going with it. So I think it's it's part of the process, but I think giving up on something too quickly can deter. So I've learned to just try and sort of persevere and see how it goes.
And will things go through multiple swatches and you'll kind of refine them and play with them? Or would you say things, I guess sometimes they arrive fully formed and sometimes they don't, would be my
I think sometimes you don't know how it's going to work out until you actually start the piece, because there's so many different elements that interplay. So I think it depends what I'm doing. I think if it's a garment, then I think you definitely have to go through quite a few swatches. I think if it's something like an accessory, if it's a shawl or whatever, then it's, if you kind of start it, then it's like you are just kind of knitting a swatch to begin with anyway. So then I'll kind of just think, all right, just start it. And then if it's not working out, but often I'll start something and I'll think like, okay, this isn't quite working. And I'll pull it back, like in the Scout Shawl that I had showed earlier. When I first started this one, I was actually mixing the Fair Isle blocks with blocks of kind of almost like a garter stitch stripe. But then because the row gauges were just so different, then it was causing the edge to really kind of warp. So with that one, I kind of like pulled it all the way back and then but it's like, if you'd done a square swatch of that, you maybe wouldn't have seen it. So I think a lot of the time it's like you kind of just have to try it and then you'll soon find out.
That's the beauty of knitting as well, is actually if you don't like it, you just take it apart and you haven't lost anything. You haven't, and you've learned something. So I always think your colors are so beautiful in the way you combine them, and that's one of the things that I think is most special about knitwear design or crochet design, is you get, as the designer, you get the opportunity to see things in like hundreds of different colors. So how do you decide, like that shawl you just showed that's coming out next week, that's quite a monochrome palette. It's then like your Florence shawl with the little flowers on the edge, that's very colorful. So how do you kind of decide what to do for each piece?
I think that it's a difficult one, and I think everyone kind of
you have to say hi to the
puppy. Carry a puppy into shop.
I think everyone has their colors that they are immediately kind of drawn to, and I try to really push myself out of my comfort zone. So that's one thing I love with collaborating. If I know that I do share a similar sort of aesthetic, or I like their aesthetic, then I do really enjoy if someone kind of gives me a color palette too. So with the Florence Shawl, Susan from Loop had chosen a couple of color palettes that she really liked. and I mean it's a very kind of loop color palette. Keeps going after the knitwear. But yeah, I think I just I try and push myself out of my comfort zone a lot with it, but it's difficult. It's difficult. My mum has a amazing sense of color, and I will often get 6 skeins and say, what do you think of this? And she'll say, take that one out. And so I feel like she's a good advisor, but yeah, it's definitely makes such an impact, I think, with a pattern, and yeah, it can change something so dramatically. But yeah, I think that's there's too much choice, I think, sometimes.
Definitely. And it does really affect the kind of look of a finished piece, what color you decide to
it does. And I think especially taking a photo of something and seeing how it translates on the photo, I think is quite crucial, because people aren't seeing it in real life, they're just seeing the photo of it. And I think sometimes it might be a really beautiful color combination in person, but in a photo it doesn't translate as well. So I think that's another kind of difficult part of it, that's something that's good to take little pictures throughout and kind of check and see how it's translating.
It's funny, sometimes you'll take a picture and suddenly you'll see something that because the camera just sees what it sees.
Yes.
It's suddenly like a detail or a color will suddenly look odd or stick out. You're like, oh gosh, I hadn't even noticed.
Yeah.
You sort of allows you to remove yourself and go, oh, okay.
That's exactly. Yeah, it's quite good just seeing it as that real sort of, the 2D kind of aspect. Yeah.
Definitely. Do let us know if any of the rest of you have a question for Florence as well, because they always take a little bit of time to come through on the Zoom chat. So if you do have a question, then please do pop it in. We've also had someone say that your designs are like wearable pieces of art, which I think is definitely true, and also comes across from the way that you talk about them as well. It's definitely is really nice. And then the other thing I noticed, you also, do you still make jewelry, or is this a thing of the past? Or
I haven't made anything recently, but I teach a crochet jewelry class quite a lot, which uses it's kind of like a tubular technique. So you make a kind of a beaded tube, like forms in a spiral. You can do all different patterns and colors. So that what I'm teaching one in November. But yeah, I haven't kind of done it as much, but again, that's sort of all of those techniques that are quite intricate. I've kind of taken more into sort of like the knitted fabric side of things, but that same sort of detail that I love.
And where would you say folks should find you if they want to kind of maybe buy some of your beautiful patterns that you've been showing samples of today, or so class to use some of those techniques?
Everything is on Ravelry, so it's just Florence Spurling on Ravelry. And then my website is florencespurling.com. So you if you click on shop, then it will take you to the e-commerce website there, and I've got all the patterns. And then for the classes that I do, I've got some classes on my website, which are more kind of private ones through me, but then I do teach with Vogue Knitting. Typically I do their virtual classes normally every other month, and next month I'm also teaching some classes with Rowan too. So I usually have kind of like 3 or 4 classes within those segments. And then in February for the Vogue live event. I've got 6 classes lined up, 3 of which will be Intarsia based as well. So if people are in that side of the world, then yeah.
Perfect. And would you say, is that what you tend to teach then, is kind of Intarsia based things, or what classes have you got coming up if people want to sign up for anything?
So I have, I kind of have I like to tailor some of the classes kind of around some of my patterns. So, but they can also, you know, it will be skills that you can obviously apply to lots of other things. So I'll often teach a class that focuses on the techniques used within this shawl. So we'll look at Intarsia and Fair Isle separately, and then we'll combine them. I've also got a class that's focused especially on the lovely sport weight Yarnadelic shawl. So in that one, we'll learn how to create one of the flower units, and you'll understand how to put it together. And then I always teach a bead knitting class as well, where you learn a few different ways of adding beads to your fabric, because I do have a few designs that use kind of different methods of that. Yeah. And then I've got a few different Intarsia classes. So there's kind of like a basics one. There's one called Botanical Intarsia, where it uses lots of different weights of yarn and uses more of a kind of organic motif. And then there's one where it's more kind of looking at creative ways of using Intarsia, so kind of thinking outside the box in terms of how you would typically use it.
Yeah, because Sue did just ask about whether you used beads in your knitting.
Okay, yeah, I do. I've got a few patterns that use beads, and a few in my head as well.
Coming.
I've never done it. Have you?
I have, but not for a long time. And it was like beads with lace. So it was like a really, it was a boonit shawl. So like very intricate, very open lace with some beads on it. But I feel like that is also due for a bit of a renaissance. Like I want to see more beaded knitting. I think it would be great. And like beads instead of Intarsia, I guess. So you can use it in the same way, can't you? To just add a bit of embellishment and like add some colour pops.
For sure, yeah, because they can be very graphic and sort of motif based as well. So
they don't have to be like, I think they're often combined with lace, but you obviously don't have to do that. So
exactly, yeah. And I think they, as you said, they add like another element of color, which is really nice. But I think the mix of the kind of the texture and the material can be really interesting, combined with kind of the yarn too.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a tiny crochet hook somewhere, but it's like the world's smallest one to like pull through the. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it can be fiddly, a little bit fiddly, but if you pre-string them on the yarn,
that makes
then it's not too better. No, it's not too hard.
I remember doing that once when I lived in London, and the whole thing of beads just exploded in a tube carriage. It was like, well, need to go back to the shop and buy more of those.
I know. I sometimes will just hear like a crunch, and it's like just lots around.
Before we go, I think we have to say hi to your lovely puppy.
This is Maeve. Unfortunately, she's not mine. She's my brother's, but she's very, very cute and
will never be forgiven by our lovely customers if we don't give her some attention. What's her name?
Maeve.
Maeve. And you said she's 8 weeks old.
She's 9 weeks. 9 weeks. 9 weeks.
Absolutely adorable.
She is gorgeous. Very, very soft. Like the softest cashmere yarn you've ever felt.
Oh, absolutely adorable. Oh, well, thank you for chatting with us, Florence. It's been a real treat.
Thank you very much for having me.
Having a bit more of an insight into your design work. And I will just take both of our faces off, and then we can, wave thank you to everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our Yarnadelic Worsted launch. It's been a real treat to spend the day with you all. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, lots of fun things today, wasn't it?
Definitely, it was good. I liked the little machine demo you did earlier as well.
Everything.
It was, definitely. So this chat will go up on our YouTube channel, hopefully to coincide with Florence's beautiful new shawl that's coming out in the Yarnadelic Worsted in kind of middle of November. So that'll be grand. Thank you all so much, and
thanks so much.
Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Perfect. Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.